journos back here at the Newcastle United training ground as ever for Eddie Howe's pre-match press conference ahead of Saturday's Premier League clash against Manchester City. It's been a newsy week for Newcastle United. Me and Jordan spoke to Newcastle CEO Darren Eales yesterday, and with the backdrop of that, then spoke to Eddie Howe today. But before we get into all that in the FFP, PSR, things that some people are frustrated by and annoy some people, but is the reality of Newcastle's situation. We'll start where Eddie Howe started in the press conference, which was on the injury front, and another brutal injury blow for Newcastle United, Jordan.
Yeah, a bombshell injury in many ways. Joelinton, 6 weeks out. It's a massive blow. You just look back at that Sunderland performance, bossed that midfield, was a big physical presence, and Newcastle's midfield just looks a lot more solid with him in it. And then Lewis Miley comes on, and Newcastle looked a little bit open, as they have in recent weeks. So taking Joelinton out of that midfield is a huge blow, and the fact that they've got really no other options apart from the three that we'll probably see on Saturday against Manchester City, when Lewis Miley, Bruno Guimaraes and Sean Longstaff. It's the only three options they've got. Taking Joelinton, that's massive. If I had someone coming back, like say a Joe Willock, for example, then I'd feel a little bit better about it. I think that Joelinton's absence maybe be easier to look over. But again, he's a massive player. So to hear that news today really is in a season of massive injury blows, this really is one of the top ones, because as I mentioned there, he's just such a big player in that team, and to take him out of it, Newcastle do lose a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going back to that midfield that played and struggled against Luton, where you had Lewis Miley, Sean Longstaff and Bruno. Three individual players who have shown how good they can be in a Newcastle United shirt this season. Unfortunately, as a midfield three, it just hasn't clicked so far. Newcastle are so finely tuned that injuries to players like Joelinton can have real knock-on impacts. But when you see them struggle against the likes of Luton going into Manchester City, it doesn't fill you with loads of hope. But as always, it's an opportunity for those players to step up and try and deliver. But also on the injury front, I asked Eddie Howe about Jacob Murphy, because it's been 9 weeks since his operation on his dislocated shoulder. Eddie Howe said at the time, 9 weeks out for him. So where's he at? Eddie Howe said he's back in light training, non-contact training. Won't obviously feature this weekend, but based on what Eddie Howe's saying, 2 weeks' time, if he's in non-contact training at the moment, hopefully he gets back in full training sooner rather than later and has a chance before the end of the month. Eddie Howe didn't say any of that. I'm sort of giving my own opinion there, but it's promising for Jacob Murphy, but not really promising for anyone else, I don't think.
No, one of the players I asked about, because I think that the whole injury list was ticked off today. Yes. And then in the press comments I finished off with a question on Harvey Barnes, and one thing that did make us giggle is Eddie Howe said that Harvey Barnes was getting closer, but then finished with, he's still got a long way to go. So it doesn't sound like Harvey Barnes is close. To get Jacob Murphy back, I think is a big boost, if you like, because it takes a little bit of the load off Miguel Almiron, who was excellent against Sunderland, was his best performance in a long time, but before that looked a player that was struggling, perhaps fatigue, many other things as well. But at least when Jacob Murphy comes back in, it gives Newcastle an option on that right hand side, because it literally has just been Miguel Almiron. They've had no one else to turn to. So as I've seen sort of last season, Jacob Murphy is very good for coming into this team in different spells this season, where Miguel Almiron goes for a tough run of form, and Jacob Murphy almost starts a good run of form by playing 4 or 5 games at the start of it before Almiron comes back in. So I think to get a body back on that right hand side is a big thing. But in terms of everyone else, injuries, there's none clearing up yet. Elliot Anderson still sounds like a long time away. Stress fracture on his back, a really complex injury, so he'll need time to come back from that. Callum Wilson, we should mention, actually should be back for the Aston Villa game. And around the Aston Villa game, he said. Go on, Don.
Yeah, Eddie has been fairly consistent on the Callum Wilson injury. He said he'll miss the next 2 games, being the Sunderland and Man City game. Should be back for Aston Villa. And he's maintained that message, which is a rare sort of precise injury update from Eddie Howe. So whether Callum Wilson is back or not remains to be seen. But if he is, then credit to Eddie Howe for being open and transparent with the nature of Callum Wilson's injury, which is a calf problem. But then, on the Jacob Murphy stuff, interesting point you raised, Jordan. It just eases the load on Miguel Almiron. And we saw last season, Jacob Murphy, until this season, was actually Newcastle's most used player under Eddie Howe because of how often he either started games or came on more frequently as a substitute. So even when he's not starting games, those 20 minutes he plays towards the back end of matches really eases the load on players like Miguel Almiron, where he's playing 70 minutes, 65 minutes, opposed to being flogged for like 85 minutes, full matches even. So promising to see him back sooner rather than later by the sounds of it. But do you want to move on to the transfer stuff, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's. I mean, if you want to just finish off injuries, Joe, like, as mentioned earlier, doesn't sound like he's close at all. And Nick Pope said Eddie Howe used the term progressing well, but again, we're not expected to see him back until April. Couldn't get my words out there, but sorry, go on.
No, I'm going off topic. Well, not off topic. I had a Nick Pope injury update from my mum as well.
All right, go on.
It's getting there was his shoulder injury, as my mum asked him. So shout out to her. She's got more concrete injury news than you or me have in recent weeks, anyway.
Yes. Anyway, sorry. Yes. Let's move on to transfers. Now, you mentioned the Darren Eales stuff. Yesterday, now we spoke. Darren Eales, he outlined the club's finances. Spoke about it positively. I think it's a 39% increase in revenue, but still a loss of, trying to write my brains out, 73 million in after tax loss. So there's still, you look at the gap between Newcastle and the top six, and to be fair, Newcastle over the last 2 years they have narrowed it in terms of the revenue, but they're still quite far away from it. I mean, you look at Tottenham's finances, which was quoted for as a 440 million. Manchester City, look, I mean, they're Premier League champions. They've been for the last 5 or 6 seasons or whatever. 710 million. Newcastle's turnover last year was 250. So just trying to paint a picture, Newcastle have got a very long way to go. And with that as well, the finances are almost now restricting them in the January transfer window, it restricts them in transfer windows. We're obviously saying this month we don't expect Newcastle to be busy. Maybe a loan, but I think the message from Eddie Howe in there was not to expect too much, to be honest. And then obviously the big topic on that you would have all seen yesterday was the headlines of Newcastle may have to sell a player in the summer to almost enable them to go and spend maximum spend in the transfer. And I think Eddie Howe in many ways, Dom, do you think he maybe, without saying it, sort of reinforced that idea that they might have to go and do that and sell a player, whether that's a Bruno and Isak or maybe an academy graduate? Yeah,
he did. I think he sort of hinted at his disdain, let's say, for the media to a degree, where he went, well, that was twisted by the media, but the question put to Darren Eales, which people wouldn't have seen, Alexander Isak, Bruno and Sven Botman were all the three names put to Darren Eales, and Darren Eales basically said, without naming those players, but that was the question asked, we're going to potentially have to trade players, as he put it, to get where they want to be, to make that margin, as Jordan touched on before, where Spurs are generating, in terms of last season, almost twice as much revenue as Newcastle have just this season. Man City nearly 3 times. So there's such a big gap where Newcastle, while they have managed to break that big six bracket, if you like, last season, in terms of the finances, are still some way off. So in terms of those players, it is a bit fear-mongering, if you like, where you go, we might have to sell Bruno, Isak, Sven Botman, those big players, but it could just become the reality for Newcastle, particularly if they finish outside of the European places this season, and they have to bridge that gap somehow. If they can sell a player, Darren Eales put it in quite sensationalist terms, where if a 1 billion bid came in for any of those players, then of course they'd sell them, because it helps bridge that gap massively, and they can reinvest that in clever ways. The issue I'd maybe have is if you sold a player like Bruno, say for 100 million, is how Newcastle reinvest. When you look back to the summer transfer window, Newcastle invested a lot more than that in the summer transfer window and have very little to show for it as it stands. So that would be my worry if you're talking about selling those players. And I think the large part of us speaking to Darren Eales yesterday and the video Newcastle put out as a club as well was to almost get that message out that Newcastle financially are still trying to bridge a gap, and selling players is going to have to be the reality of Newcastle's future, as well as buying players, because at the moment they are at that sort of financial fair play, profit and sustainability rule limit. And Eddie Howe touched on that in his press conference, where he was like, players can't really do any deals as such. He contradicted himself a little bit, where he was like, we can't do anything, but then said the injury situation means we'll have to inject something into the squad, whether that be another player coming back from a loan. Touched on Joe White, a young lad who they'll look at, but is he going to be the answer? Let's be honest, no disrespect to him, probably not. If you can get a Calvin Phillips in for a fairly modest loan fee, then that's something Newcastle wouldn't rule out doing. Darren Eales said the same yesterday, where it's like, if the right player comes along and the club can afford to pay him at the right price, then they would look at it. But the realistic situation for Newcastle is, despite being backed by PIF, being the richest club in the world, if you like, or having the richest owners in the world, they ultimately are shackled by these financial fair play rules.
Yeah, it's such a frustration because, look, we've all banded the term out. Newcastle do have the richest owners in world football, and they can't spend the money. So I think Liam put in a term yesterday: don't hate the player, hate the game. The player is Newcastle, they want to go and spend, but the game is financial fair play, which doesn't allow them. And the term financial fair play, is it fair? I mean, Newcastle for 15 years under Mike Ashley didn't spend a penny, or hardly spent a penny, and then as soon as they get rid of him and they get themselves in a position where they can go and spend money, you've got these rules saying that they can't. So for me, it's just it isn't financial fair play. It isn't fair. I mean, in many ways, at this moment in time, the top six are protected. They've got the revenue to go out and spend this money, whereas Newcastle are trying to play a catch-up, and they will get there. Newcastle will 100% get there. The revenues will continue to build. Next season, we'll have the Stella money, the Champions League money on the accounts, Adidas as well. So their revenues will increase, and they will get at that point. But it's just sad because Newcastle want to try and go big now, but it's just going to have to take a little bit of time, and look, who knows how long it'll take. That's, I mean, the financial fair play is so frustrating that it could actually take Newcastle longer than what they'd hoped to try and bridge that gap to the top six. They can do it on the pitch. They showed that last season by breaking into the top four, but in terms of off the pitch and getting the extra funds, suspending the transfer window, they're struggling to do at the moment, and that's where the possibility of selling a player in the summer comes into play. I mean, look, people don't want to lose a Bruno, they don't want to lose an Isak, and they don't want to lose a Botman, but I think that's the harsh reality of the situation Newcastle find themselves in. Darren Eales yesterday, look, people might not say that Darren Eales said, we don't have to sell star players, or the term star players, and people might not think that he used that term, but he used the examples of selling Coutinho, what Liverpool did, to enable them to go and spend money. Aston Villa with Jack Grealish. There was another example he used as well. Declan Rice, yeah. So he's using them examples. I mean, there's a reason why he's doing that. There must be in the clubs thinking that they might go and have to sell, as I say, a star player in the summer. You can look to maybe sell your fringe players, but how many teams are going to come in and want to buy them? Probably not. So that's why you look at your star players as players that are going to attract interest. And as I say, I think that's the harsh reality of FFP in the situation Newcastle find themselves in. I really hope they don't have to sell any of those players, but I just think from the interview with Darren Eales and the sounds that have been coming out of the football club, I do get the impression that we might have to say goodbye to one of them players at the end of the season, or, as I say, possibly an academy graduate to build that budget and help and enable them to go and spend a lot of money in the summer. Yeah,
it's an interesting attitude adjustment regarding FFP, because under Mike Ashley, when Newcastle just didn't spend, you almost saw it as a good thing, where it stopped your rivals spending too much, spending beyond the means, and progressing and being ambitious. So you almost saw it as a good thing. and it shackled the elite clubs, if you like, to a degree. But now Newcastle are pushing to be that club, as other clubs will have found out in recent seasons, trying to break into that bracket. Yeah, it becomes more and more frustrating when you have money to spend as such, but the fact financial fair play, as Darren Eales put it, has teeth to it, in terms of if you do with Everton, spend beyond your means, you get deducted 10 points, and your Premier League position is made more precarious. And so yeah, I think the frustration has really started to grow. It's been there pretty much since the takeover, but what was possibly seen as a good thing in the past by a lot of Newcastle fans, or certainly by myself anyway, is now becoming a harsh reality for Newcastle United in the transfer market.
Yeah. And
just on the transfer situation, obviously there's been links. Eddie Howe was asked about Dominic Solanke. Newcastle, I think we both agree, probably need a striker. Whether they'll sign one, based on what Eddie Howe says, it looks very unlikely. Dominic Solanke's name was put to him. He said he loves Dominic Solanke as a player. He was the one who signed him for Bournemouth, but finances, they're nowhere near being able to afford a player like him. So yeah,
Newcastle fans won't like hearing that. You can't afford a player from Bournemouth, but take that away. Dominic Solanke at this moment, Bournemouth paid £20 million for Dominic Solanke, so if they're going to sell him in this January transfer window, bear in mind he's their top goal scorer, their talisman, you're probably going to have to pay upwards of $50 million to sign Dom Solanke in January. So I get what Eddie Howe is saying, is that they can't afford that type of deal. But I imagine fans, when you read that quote, will be, well, why can't we sign a player from Bournemouth? But it's just the price tag that Dominic Solanke has. He's one of the top scorers in the Premier League, having a really good season. Naturally, his price tag is inflated.
Yeah, definitely.
So as Liam Kennedy is ringing,
he always rings it in opportune times. It's usually bang on team news, or when we're doing a video, or when Eddie Howe's doing his press conference. Liam, stop it.
He's gone now, right.
Okay, good. Back on track. Where were we going with that? The transfer thing, I mean, what do Newcastle do this window? Where do they go from here? Because the message they've got out loud and clear, which we'll relay, it's what we've been told. As much as we want to report Newcastle are going to sign loads of players, and sometimes some people will still report that, but yeah, where do Newcastle go from here, Jordan, in the transfer market?
I think, look, I'm not going to rule out that Newcastle sign a player. I think they quite feasibly can. Calvin Phillips is one that I think that possibly could get done late on the window, as Eddie Howe has alluded to in previous press conferences, that Newcastle United will likely do business late in the window, depending on the situation. Joelinton's injury, it makes Newcastle weaker in that midfield area, so it probably does emphasise a need to go and sign a midfielder. So, of my own opinion, they could potentially look to bring him in now. But we've had this in previous transfer windows. I know this one does feel different, but we've had messages in previous transfer windows saying Newcastle won't do much business this window, and the one I always go back to was Newcastle United will not be buying Alexander Isak this summer, and then went and done it. So I mean, you've always got to be mindful when you speak of these things, but I do think at this moment, as I get the feeling now, Newcastle won't be busy, and I think the best case scenario is probably to go and sign one player. If you had to pick a player on the pitch or a position to go and strengthen, it probably would be the midfield area. Now, as I mentioned, after that Joelinton injury, I think he'll be back late February, but it's still a lot of time to be without him. And as I say, that midfield area looks really, really weak. But in an ideal world, you'd want to strengthen several positions, but as I say, Newcastle just don't have the capability to do it this summer. This January, sorry.
Yeah, on a previous video you mentioned, Jordan, the squad is still capable of reaching that top six again. Do you feel that still now with Joelinton for the best part of the next 2 months not playing?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, as I touched on at the start of the video, taking Joelinton out of that team is massive, and that midfield three of Longstaff, Bruno and Miley does worry me a little bit from what I've seen during the Christmas period. But you then hope that that was just a bad dip for the team, and with Newcastle now hopefully start of a good run after beating Sunderland. That midfield almost follows with it, and they put themselves in good form as well. So I'm gonna double down and say that Newcastle can still qualify or still get into the, I'll say top seven.
European
I think
places,
and getting the European places with what they've got. But yeah, unfortunately, as I say, the Joelinton injury has potential to change the dynamic over the next couple of months until he returns.
Yeah, it's just, the thing is, we talk about this injury situation, is if it's eventually going to ease and Newcastle going to have everyone back. By the looks of it, it just never seems to be ending. And they're probably a Bruno and Isak, I don't want to tempt fate here, I shouldn't say this, but a Bruno and Isak injury away from absolute disaster, where they've got no one that can play up front. The midfield is almost non-existent. They're going to have to call someone else up, and I think that's probably part of the thinking. I'll mention him again, like Joe White coming back just for the month. He may go out on loan later in the month, but just to have that extra body on the training ground more than anything, and in case there is an injury, there's someone who can play in a midfield position there. So yeah,
you got the Joe White story last week, Don, about Newcastle want to bring him in and having a look at him.
Yes. Yeah, well, because there was interest. Crew Alexander obviously keen to extend his loan. Is a big step up, League 2 to the Premier League, but Elliot Anderson made it after going out on loan at Bristol Rovers and seemed to adapt really well. Joe White has played a bit in pre-season for the first team, still yet to make his debut for Newcastle. I think he's contracted till 2025. So yeah, he's been linked with a couple other League 2 clubs. He's doing a good job. I think he scored at the weekend for Crew as well. So Newcastle, his loan naturally ended. They haven't recalled him at Crew, but Crew keen to extend the loan. A couple other teams obviously looking at him as well. But yeah, Newcastle, due to the injury situation, just want him back, want that body in at the training ground. And who knows, if he does a good job, potentially he might get on the pitch and get some Premier League minutes or FA Cup minutes at Fulham if he's not tied. I'll have to check that out. But yeah, just on the loan situation, you and me asked 2 questions. We're going a bit, I don't know, scraping the barrel here, let's say. But I asked about Isaac Hayden.
Yes, I was trying to remember that as well.
Terrible. Newcastle's forgotten that. Isaac Hayden, obviously recalled from his loan at Standard Liège. I asked what the plans were for him. Obviously, Newcastle's midfield, they need that strengthening, but Eddie Howe said no, he's going back out on loan again. Nothing lined up as he understands right now, or he said it's unclear, but we'll fully expect him to go out on loan. Championship clubs interested, and yeah, you asked about Yankuba Minte as well.
Yes.
Tough week for him.
Yeah, it was, yeah. Eddie Howe wasn't aware of the situation. I don't know if many of you guys out there watch him, but he's been called up to the African Cup of Nations squad, Gambia's African Cup of Nations squad. They flew to the Ivory Coast, or were due to fly to the Ivory Coast on Thursday and had to abort the flight after 9 minutes. Lack of oxygen off board. Apparently some players had actually passed out, but thankfully the pilot realised the situation and quickly landed the plane, and got the Gambia squad are fine. So obviously I'm sure they'll travel on the way to travelling to the Ivory Coast now. But on the back of that, I asked Eddie Howe if Minte would be recalled, and because there's no callback or automatic callback option, I think it sounds very, very unlikely. He said we'll continue to assess the situation, but I mean, he said this a few weeks ago as well, so you know, if I'm reading between the lines, I think unless Newcastle pick up another injury, or Jacob Murphy has a setback, or Miguel Almiron picks up an injury, I think it's probably at this moment in time unlikely that he'll be recalled. But you know, who knows? Just Eddie Howe says they're still assessing it. But yeah, there was, in many ways, there was no update on Yankuba Minte.
So yeah, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up there. Is there anything else you want to add? Yeah, we've scraped the barrel for 24 minutes now. But yeah, myself, Jordan Cronin, and of course Liam Kennedy will be back at St James's Park tomorrow as Newcastle play Manchester City. Liam obviously not here at the press conference today, too busy ringing Jordan. So we'll see him tomorrow. We'll look forward to all his takes, and hopefully it's a positive weekend for Newcastle United. We'll have it all to come on the Geordie Journal, so check that out. And in the meantime, if you like what we're doing, please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.